Hello. Welcome to this week's episode of Leadership. I'm Thea Alley. I'm one of the 4 co-hosts of our program. For those of you joining us for the first time, this is a podcast where we seek to discuss, main issues of our time from different political vantage points, with the purpose of seeing where we can find consensus, or perhaps sometimes understanding the real sources of our disagreement, but doing it in a way that's cordial and respectful and not just resorting to people, screaming at each other, arguing at each other, and not really making any progress. So this is our experiment to see that it can be done with 4 real people, who care about these issues and care about being a part of a larger community. So this week, this is our 3rd episode. So if you are listening, we're hoping that means that you listened to our first 2 episodes and you liked it. And hopefully you will like and subscribe to our podcast so that we can continue to make these episodes and we can, evolve and get to talk about even more interesting topics. I think all of our topics have been interesting, but the hope is that we will be able to continue this and the topics can evolve and perhaps eventually get some audience participation of things you'd like to hear us discuss. So on that note, this week we will be talking about immigration. It feels, I think when you think about politics and reasons that people differ and they gravitate to, perhaps one party over the other, immigration tends to be an issue where you can really draw, pretty key distinctions on how the parties approach that and the philosophies around what immigration should look like in America. So we thought that would be a pertinent topic to focus on. Again, our goal in having this discussion is really to understand, what we believe, each party, what the party position is, and then how we reconcile that with our own individual beliefs and how we see ourselves playing into that larger issue. So on that note, every week it's like, well, who's going to start? I don't know. Do we have any volunteers for who wants to start off on this topic?
Dion, I saw some of your notes about how you disagreed with perhaps with the party. So why don't you go first?
Yeah, Brett. Yeah, yeah. And Dion, I saw your notes. So your notes were pretty good. I think that actually is a good starting point.
Okay. I can go ahead and start. So one of the things that we like to do is we try to espouse what the party line is on whatever topic we're talking about, and then kind of talk about, do you agree or disagree? So hopefully those of you who are listening or watching right now, you know that I am the Libertarian here. And so the Libertarian Party says from their top issues page, Libertarians believe that if someone is peaceful, they should be welcome to immigrate to the United States. And Libertarians do not support classifying undocumented immigrants as criminals. Our current immigration system is an embarrassment. People who would like to follow the legal procedures are unable to because these procedures are so complex and expensive and lengthy. If Americans want immigrants to enter through legal channels, we need to make those channels fair, reasonable, and accessible. And so I mostly agree with that policy. I believe that our country should be open to legal immigration. The part that I maybe differ from probably about half the party on this is I do think that you have to start with some sort of laws, some sort of national sovereignty, right? And I kind of think of it like our nation on the world stage should be really no different than like my private property here within the country, in that I am more than happy to host people here, have people over, and invite people in to do whatever, but you can't just come barging in whenever you want. I should be allowed to be safe in my property. And I think the country should be allowed to be safe, at least in its borders, knowing who is crossing, what they're bringing with them, what their ties are, right? So, yeah, I think we need to have immigration. I think immigrants are a great asset to our country, but we need to have a way for them to do it legally.
So Okay, so I'm coming from center left, and I know the what is espoused out there sometimes is that Democrats want open borders, and I don't think that there's any real truth to that. I don't think that there are actually Democratic policymakers out there that are like, hey, let's just have open borders. The argument being that Democrats want open borders so that then all the people who come in can then vote for them, but that's illegal also. So I don't know that I necessarily agree with that stereotype of folks from the left.
Can we dig into that?
Please. Yeah.
I mean, we could probably point to why, especially within the past almost 4 years, why people say that Democrats are for open borders, right? There have been a record number of illegal crossings, especially at the southern border, during the Biden-Harris administration. So I think that's why a lot of people would say, well, clearly they're for it because they haven't done anything about it. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, can I ask whether or not has there, and while I agree with you in premise, but is it that there's a record number of crossings or a record number of interactions, perhaps because of the resources that the Biden-Harris administration has put towards Border Patrol? You know what I'm saying? Like,
That's a good question.
So as an example, people talk about, so much fentanyl has been stopped at the border, a record amount. So it must be that a record amount is coming through under the Biden-Harris administration. But no, it's that the resourcing behind Border Patrol has allowed us to stop a record number from coming in, if that makes sense.
I think from what I understand, it does look like the number of people at least attempting to crossing, being apprehended is high. So okay. Whether it's record or not, I think objectively, I think we can probably agree it's a high number. Full disclosure, 2 ways where, I would say I personally have touched immigration is I'm an attorney and I've represented in an asylum case. I've represented someone who did present at the border. And so my client presented at the border and then was immediately detained and he filed for asylum, and I represented him in his asylum. And he was ended, and we were able to successfully. This was over a 3-year period, actually, because there were some issues we had to appeal. Initially, I got him what's called withholding of removal, and the only reason that he didn't get granted asylum initially is because he was one of the people who fell under the Trump's transit ban, where he had come, the policy that said if you came through a third country as you were trying to immigrate, that you needed to seek asylum in that country and you couldn't present yourself at the U.S. border and be granted asylum. So because my client fell into that policy at the time when he requested asylum, he ended up not being initially able to be granted asylum, but he got withholding of removal because it's a different legal standard. And essentially the courts found that if he was returned to his home country, he would be subject to persecution and harm. Like he was too dangerous to send him back home. So he was able to stay here, able to get a work permit. And then we were able to appeal his case when the Biden administration came. His case was going on, but when the policies changed under the Biden administration. So that's one thing from a legal perspective, but that informs kind of what we're talking about. And when we talk about what is legal immigration, right? So we have these laws on the books that state how people who are fleeing violence and, seeking asylum in a different country, that things that they can do to present themselves and then prove that, hey, yes, I meet these legal requirements. There's certain elements that you have to prove. It's not easy. And quite often, a lot of these people who are crossing illegally or are presenting themselves at the border and seeking asylum, that's what they're doing. Now, unfortunately, what we're seeing is there are people who are fleeing their countries under economic duress, maybe not necessarily violence, but because we don't have an immigration system that is properly staffed, properly resourced, and we don't have immigration laws right now that really permit a clean path to legal immigration, you find more people trying to take those other routes. And I think that's really where we struggle as a country when it comes to then what do we do with all these people that present at our borders? And, some of them may, have genuine cases of, where they can establish the elements of asylum. And then others, they just want to come to the United States for the opportunity, but we haven't created a system in which people can utilize or can, exercise or operate under our laws, because our laws are outdated and they don't match the reality on the ground. So then the question is, what do we do about it? And my frustration when we hear the different parties address it, they tend to not address the issue of what should our laws look like and how should they be executed? But instead, it's always about the border and the number of people who want to seek to come into this country. And I think it's like, because we're focusing on one issue and we're not focusing on the other, we can never solve for either. Does that make sense?
Did the proposed bipartisan deal that got kind of torpedoed, did that address what you're looking for? It
somewhat did. Because it provided more resources. Because I can tell you, okay, so my client's case sat in appeal for 2 years, and it was a very, and well beyond when the legal issue was very easy to be decided, just because they have so few immigration judges, they have so few people to process these cases, they just sit, right? And the people who take priority quite often are the people who are in detention. So the only reason my client's case even got heard as soon as it did is because he was detained. So because he's essentially in prison and he didn't have the means to really apply for any kind of bail or bond, then his case got heard in the beginning of 2020. But yeah, I think that deal, that particular proposed legislation, at least attempted to try to get at the backlog, but it didn't really, provide relief as far as our overall immigration laws and really being able to either have a better understanding of what those laws are, how they are now, and enforce them as they're written now, or expand them in a way that allows for more people to, in their home country, apply for some type of visa or some type of legal status to then immigrate into the U.S. So the other thing, I know I've talked a lot. The other thing I didn't get to say is my grandparents came to the United States in the 1960s. And so my mom was a teenager, and they came because Vietnam was going on. And a lot of men were off at the war because of the draft, and Sears needed HVAC repair people. And so they put out an ad in Trinidad asking for any young men who wanted to come and get trained in this job. And my grandfather, he was a mechanic. So he came to the U.S., got trained, spent his life, as I also told him, he was the Maytag repair guy. He could fix your washing machine, your air conditioning, all that. And then after he was here for 3 years, he brought my grandmother and two of my mom's brother, and then they ended up having my mom's younger brother here. And, we're the American dream. My mom turned 18. She joined the Air Force. She had me. Guess what? I joined the military. My mom got her citizenship through the military. And we've done well as an American family. But the opportunity that my grandfather had, my relatives now don't. It's very difficult to come into, even for work, and I always think, well, what's changed, right? Because that same opportunity, look at what our family's done. So why is the system so different now that it's so difficult for people to immigrate, even through quote unquote legal means? Okay, I've talked way too much. So
let's hear from the Republican side.
Yeah. So.
Sure. So, I can kind of start off with the Republican Party approach to things. And it's one of those, if you read the platform, it's a very aggressive approach to the policies that are out there. And at least my personal standpoint, I'm not necessarily for in terms of the verbiage that's kind of used here, but I'll read what they have in terms of the initial commitment. It says Republicans offer an aggressive plan to stop the open border policies that have opened the floodgates of a tidal wave of illegal aliens, deadly drugs, and migrant crime. They will end the invasion of the southern border, restore law and order, protect American sovereignty, and deliver a safe, prosperous future for all Americans. It's one of those that, that's just kind of the initial, and then there's a list of things that they go down through there in terms of securing the border, enforcing immigration laws, having a deportation program, strict vetting, addressing sanctuary cities, and then also making sure that the immigration system puts the American worker first. And so that's, kind of the basis that's there. And there's not, I'm sure I haven't read through everybody's platform as well, but there's not necessarily a lot of these are the policies that we'll do. It's just more of like, here's kind of the thoughts that we have about it. Personally, my take on it is I'm kind of with Dion in this, that America is a wonderful country. And I think people should have the opportunity to come here legally. For the most part, we are a country of immigrants, right? I mean, there's so many people over the course of history that have come to this country because of the opportunity that the government provides. But with that, there does need to be a process to it, right? And so that's what, I agree with Thea that our processes are very broken. They need fixed. But that's one of those things that how do you handle that, right? And I think this is where the conversation goes to, in terms of having stricter border policies and putting kind of a hold on immigration for a time, right? Because I think about it in a couple different ways. The analogies that come to mind is from a medical standpoint, right? If you're a surgeon and you have a patient that is bleeding out, but yet you've got bad policies in place, what do you do first, right? Like you stop the patient from bleeding out and then you go fix the policies and administrations, right? Or the example, we were Air Force, so we all kind of understand, the inherent aspect of being on a plane. Well, if you're flying commercial and something happens, what do they tell you to do with your oxygen mask? Do you help everybody around you first, or do you put yours on so that you are in a capable position to be able to help other people?
Well, I mean, here's the question though. Oh, sorry. One question though, the world doesn't stop while we're stopping the bleeding. So do we just remove ourselves from our role in the world as different things are happening that are causing people to need to or want to come to the U.S.? How does what you're saying reconcile with that?
What is our role in the world? That's another topic we should talk about, but not here.
That's a whole other topic, right? What should we do? Touching on that briefly, it's one of those that, I'm a Republican, so I'm going to throw out Reagan, right? Is the idea that this is the last bastion of freedom, right? If America falls, there is nowhere else to go, right? There's nowhere else in the world that really offers the same level of resources and freedoms that our citizens have. And so we have to make sure that we shore up ourselves before we are really capable of helping anybody else in the world, without diving into like foreign policy and stuff like that, because it is a topic we need to have. But yes, we do need to take care of our allies, because the same thing, if they fall and it's not necessarily like evil per se, but ineffective governments, continue to thrive in areas that they shouldn't, and that spreads, that creates problems, so we need to be able to take care of our allies too. But Thea, to answer your question, no, we shouldn't just completely shut down our interactions with people who want to come here, because there are people who have a genuine need and they need to come here and they need to be here for that opportunity. And so, yes, we should be able to bring those people in, but there should be a process for it. But there may be a time frame where that needs to be bottlenecked a little bit, where it needs to be slowed down so that we have time to fix our processes and that we can really help those people that are in true dire need. Like you said, the folks that are coming for the economic opportunities and stuff like that. While, yes, we can't help everybody, we can't turn everybody. There's a balance that has to exist there. Because when it also comes down to this, when you have people that are coming into the systems, it's a burden on society, right? And understand this from like a parenting perspective, right? We've all got kids, right? Would you guys agree with me that your children are a burden to you, right? It doesn't mean a burden is a negative thing,
financially, yes,
but it is a weight that you carry, is it not?
Yes,
right? Yes. And everybody thinks that like burden is a negative concept, and it's not. It just significantly means it's the weight that you carry, right? It's one of those like, my love costs something for my kids. It doesn't cost my kids something, but it costs me something to give it. I can't just give that freely and it's unending. There's a supply that's there. So it always comes down to who's paying for this? Who can afford to cover this? And so there has to be a balance of how we can help without hurting ourselves. And that's where that discussion around, immigration border, at least in my thoughts, really kind of lie.
Well, one of the things that I always have a hard time with that is like, and I'll use the Ohio example because I actually think it's on point here. a lot of times, okay, we as a population we are starting to become a population like this, where we are older and we have less younger people. So as the workforce ages out, as the boomers are starting to age out, we don't actually have enough workers to fill the gaps that are going to be left when the boomers start, as they continue to retire. We don't have enough of a workforce to backfill that. Typically what you do is you allow people to come in and to help to fill out that workforce. And that's, a lot of economists say that is one of the solutions that we as a United States would need to adopt if we want to continue our workforce and keep jobs here in the United States, because there are going to be too many jobs and not enough workers. In the case of Springfield, Ohio, you had a town that was being revitalized, had businesses that had returned and were looking for workers. And that is what brought these Haitian immigrants to Springfield, right? Was jobs. Them coming, yes, it created issues when it came to housing, but it's not that these people were looking for free housing or they were looking for government handouts. It's just that there was a finite resource with housing and different things, because now your population's increasing. But that somehow that issue, which would be an issue anywhere where you have a growth of jobs and your population increases, and therefore you need to kind of figure that out. That seems to be framed as, look at these immigrants and look at what they did to this town and how this is this negative thing. And it was propped up as an example, getting away from their eating cats and dogs, but it was propped up as an example of a bad example of immigration. But the folks that were there did come. They came through a program where they had legal status, a program that was sanctioned by the United States government. They came, they're working, these are people who are looking to make a life, but still it seems to have been used as a negative example of what we don't want. And I can't wrap my head around it, right?
Didn't the mayor come out and say too that he was really glad that these immigrants had come here and helped to revitalize the town?
I mean, yes, yeah, and it's weird.
Yeah, they actually encouraged that. They were the city actually wanted that to happen originally. I think that there was one thing. So I was reading up on this, right? Because especially when all the dog eating stuff came out, right? And it's like, okay, is there any truth to this? And in my research on it, I came across a lot of articles that were actually diving into the real story of the Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio. And they did come in, absolutely, like you said, Thea, they came in, they helped to revitalize, they brought jobs, they brought, local industry, there were electricians and mechanics and carpenters and, people that came and they were able to work their trades in the city and help to revitalize. One of the things that is presented not necessarily as a problem, but a challenge, I guess you could say, is that there were a lot of them. Right? Like over 10,000 in Springfield is a very tiny city. And so what people were saying, even though they did welcome these people, they wanted them to come and assimilate and, become Americans and work and, everything. When you have such a large influx of a culture that's different than yours, it can just be socially very challenging for that integration. And then whatever friction exists, just it's easy for that to become an us and them sort of situation, right? Because you just, you kind of look around and you go, wow, there's an awful lot of them, and where have all of us gone, kind of thing. Which, sounds maybe a little bit xenophobic, but I think we all, when there's that big of a group that kind of shows up all at once, I think we just have to recognize that would be a social challenge. That
I guess my issue, I bring it up not as an example that it wouldn't be a social challenge. I completely acknowledge that, right? There's a lot of issues that come whenever you're changing your population's dynamics, like in demographics, right? And especially when you're increasing your population in any area. But I don't see why this has been used as an example of why we shouldn't want immigrants coming in, why it's being propped up by one party as an example of the problem with immigration. What you're describing is just it's just social economics, right? Like you're trying to figure out how do you take a small, community and now you grow it in a short period of time and all the things that come with it. I just don't see why that, from a political standpoint, and when we're talking about what we should and shouldn't have in this country, why that's an example where we're seeing someone say this is what we don't want. And that was
Brett,
what
do you want to take a
the
stab
answer
at that, since it is the Republicans that tend to be propping that up as a bad thing?
Yeah.
Well, a quick answer to it, Dion, is the fact that it's an election year. Right. So any item that's out there to raise the political hackles of anybody is going to be used in that capacity. We all know that our media on all sides has biases. Right. So to think that people are getting the entire story from any mainstream media is not. Like, you're going to have to dig into independent journalists and really find information that backs up that. When you're talking Springfield, guys, that's 20 minutes from me.
Yes.
Right.
Please.
Like, I live in the backyard of it. And so to talk about the issues that I've seen here locally from that, and this is not a political standpoint. This is just the reality of living where we are. Right. I live in Dayton, Ohio. Our population here is about 800,000 for the metro area. But you get up to Springfield, their population is about 60,000 people. So you drop 10,000 plus people into an area, that is a huge change. And when you have people that are, just culturally different, it doesn't make them bad people, but it's a different culture. And when you're trying to have people abiding by laws, some of my friends that lived up in Springfield, the major conversation I had to them was driving safety, right? Just being on the roads, people understanding how to operate a vehicle. But then also you start thinking about that. How are these people getting driver's license? Right? Like, they may have the capability to drive, but do they have the legality to? And that was actually an issue that came up because there was one of the immigrants while driving had crossed over center and actually collided with a school bus. And it was a huge issue that came up. Well, it came to find out that he was driving illegally. Right. And to me, that is not an immigration issue. That's, are you going to abide by the laws? Right. And so when you have a mass immigration like that, now you have to take time to educate people properly about how to operate in that society. And again, that's part of our whole policies and administrations that we have to take time to help people to understand.
I think what my issue is, I feel like people use, or what I see is, we look at the challenges that may come. We ignore whatever benefits can come from immigration. We focus on the challenges that may arise, and then we use that to justify why we shouldn't do it in the first place, right? And that's where I get frustrated.
I'm with you. I don't agree with that. I think it's a terrible way to go about it. Like, we shouldn't look at one issue and color the whole topic that way because of one thing. And this is again why we have to have civil discourse.
I'm going to pause myself because my battery is about to die and I need to charge my computer because I'm terrible. I didn't prep right. So you guys keep talking, but I'm going to go off camera for a second.
Okay. So Brett, Dion, so to that point, just real quickly, as being in the military previously, have you ever gone TDY to Europe, and did you take a driving test before driving in Europe, or did you say, okay, I can drive on the other side of the street, or I'm pretty sure I know what most of those signs mean? And I, not to put you guys on the spot, I mean, I just did it this summer. I rented a car in Ramstein, Germany, and I drove all over Europe and through the channel and to one side of the street and back to the other. And I was like, man, there's a lot of these signs. I really don't know what they mean, but I think I'm doing okay here. I'm
sure,
not,
but did you have to present your driver's license to get the rental car?
My American driver's license, yes.
Yeah.
But I didn't.
And so you show competency
in America.
And so to my thoughts, like, if someone can show that competency,
just like they've got,
but if they can show that competency, then that's not a problem.
No, they drive in Haiti, so they've got competency in Haiti. They come to the United States.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If they can show that competency, that's there. But if there's no documentation to show that they have competency, how do you go about that? Like, you just take their word for it? Oh yeah, I know how to drive.
That's what they did.
So I would put out there that, here is something that maybe would be sort of an analog, right? It is that every country has different driving laws, and they're going to have different standards for acquiring a driver's license in those different countries, right? We have an analog to that here in the United States, which is like concealed carry permits, right? So like you can go to one state and you can get a concealed carry permit, and another state will be like, well, that doesn't meet our standards, so you can't carry here. I'm glad that you have a permit for your state, but don't do it here. Should we apply that same sort of standard? And so when people immigrate to the United States, we go, okay, you grew up driving in Germany, so you're good to drive here because those guys are great drivers. Or you grew up driving in, like, I don't know, Jamaica.
We already have
what?
those. We already have those. Most states require you to have a United States issued driver's license, right? So to legally drive in the U.S., normally you need to have a driver's license that's a United States driver's license. For a lot of times they don't recognize international driver's licenses. Depends on the state, but we already have that. And I think Brett bringing up this, it's a good. There are some places there are restrictions on to legally drive. You would have to have met these standards. And if you haven't, then you're not supposed to legally drive in the U.S. You definitely can't own an insured car.
Tourists come here all the time, right? And they rent cars.
Yeah.
So and they're not going to have a U.S. driver's license. So I'm just.
That's what I'm saying. It depends on states. Yeah. But there's definitely states where you're not supposed to legally drive without an American license.
Well, and you understand, guys, like my point of bringing that up too was not necessarily to say on the driver's license thing. It's just one of those because again, the person that caused the accident was driving illegally, did not have any type of license, right? So it's more a matter of if you have people that are coming into a culture, are they going to abide by the local laws? Because even if you go over to Europe, Will, and you do something illegal, you're responsible for your actions, right? And if you're going to be staying there any length of time, doesn't it make sense that you would learn the laws and the culture of that area so you know how to abide by it?
I don't disagree. I think we're getting off on a tangent on the driver's license part in particular. But I mean, I'm also not prevented from going to Germany because of a thing. But so let me ask you guys this though. So. Dion, back at the beginning, you had said, you wanted to dig a little bit deeper on my position that I don't think any Democratic policymaker wants just open borders. I like to think that that politicians are rational actors. What benefit do we think would come from just having open borders if only citizens can vote, so that would be illegal if they are? Why would any Democratic policymaker want open borders?
I can actually answer that because the argument typically is that we want open borders so folks can come in and eventually become U.S. citizens and then they'd be able to vote, right? That we want to change. This is the replacement theory, right? That we want to permanently change the demographics in the U.S. because it would favor the Democratic Party, right? So you bring in people and you give them all these opportunities. They eventually become citizens. They're loyal to the Democratic Party. And then, the cost is they've pushed out folks that are here. They've taken their jobs. We've given an advantage to folks at the detriment to current citizens. So I think that's the theory. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's like the cynical argument of why Democrats may want or favor open borders.
Dion, Brett, do you, without getting into the nitty gritty of the great replacement theory, but is that what we really think? Is that we're looking at this is the long con from the Democrats who can't get themselves out of a wet paper bag?
So, I mean, we've all worked for or continued to work for the federal government. We've all seen how grossly inefficient it is just on a normal basis, right?
Yep.
So having been a part of the federal government in some way, shape, or form for almost 30 years now, I would say that it just stretches credibility to the limit to imagine that some sort of conspiracy like this could work. right? Like just the number of people that have to be involved, the number of people who have to continue to do it and buy into it and make it function. I mean, I feel the same way about, people who say that 9/11 was an inside job and, all these things, right?
But I hate to say it, I think our privilege and our education and our level of eliteness is coming out in this conversation because so many people do believe that, or some version of what I said, right? That the idea of immigrants coming in, that they're coming to take away opportunities from Americans, right? That as far as the political side of it, that those types of immigrants are also going to eventually help advantage one party over the other. But I do think that there is a perception that from some people that others want immigrants to come in and they want these immigrants to have more power and opportunity that they have right now. I do think people believe that. And I get it from my own family members because, my dad is from South Carolina. And so half my family lives in the South and they think that, right? I literally just recently got into an argument with someone on Facebook, my own cousin, talking about immigrants and FEMA relief and how immigrants are getting this and FEMA's not providing for American citizens. And I was like, what are you talking about? Right? You're my cousin. Like my mom is your aunt and you hate immigrants all of a sudden. Where did this come from?
Well, and to think that even FEMA is that capable of discriminating who they give aid to, they can barely give aid to like anybody. And I'm not trying to speak all that bad about FEMA, but
okay. So to be fair on the FEMA thing, and we're really only talking about this because it is very relevant right now while we're recording this podcast. We just are starting to deal with the aftermath of Hurricane Milton, and of course, Will has firsthand experience with that, living in Tampa. But to be fair, FEMA runs a couple of programs that do provide like housing and subsistence to immigrants. That is a separate pot of FEMA money from the disaster relief, but it's all under FEMA. And so when you have, say, Fox News, the right-leaning news, say FEMA is giving hundreds of millions of dollars to immigrants, and Mayorkas just said that FEMA is broke, right? You hear that, and those statements are true, but they don't tell the whole story. And so I can understand why people would think, well, gosh, why is FEMA spending hundreds of millions of dollars on illegal immigrants and they're not helping people in North Carolina?
Well, and the thing that upsets me about that, and this is where I know all of us have a level of knowledge of how pots of money work, right? We were all in the military. We've all dealt with, this line of funding is dedicated to this. And those decisions are made today and then have to be executed at least the next fiscal year, right? So as far as FEMA, those pots of money, those decisions were made with anticipating that, this is how much we anticipate the need for hurricane relief will be. And now we're getting these once in 100-year storms that have caused way more damage and more people need relief than was anticipated. So the issue isn't that FEMA made a choice. Do we help folks that, experienced, loss because of Milton, or do we help these immigrants in these other communities? Oh, we're going to choose to help the immigrants. The choice was, this is what we predict our need will be. And now the need is greater. And now we have to make new choices. And that's, again, the framing that is frustrating because it's not an accurate conversation about how we're allocating our resources or how those resources were actually allocated and the decision making behind them. Right.
Yeah. To your point, Thea, like you said, though, if there's a nugget of truth, like Dion said, both of those statements are technically true, but it doesn't tell the whole picture. If there's a nugget of truth behind it and the media can play up one side or the other, yeah. People don't have time when they're working 3 jobs to do all the independent research and, compare different media sites to get the true whole picture. And I think that's part of the problem is that there is a nugget of truth in all of this, even when we're talking about Springfield, the challenges of dropping 10,000 people in that town is the nugget of truth, perhaps not the cats and dogs, but.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think one thing we haven't talked about, we kind of skirted around it with the discussion of Springfield, is now we're in a point where we're talking millions of people in this country who are either, here legally but aren't citizens or have no documentation, no status. And then it's, well, what do you do with these? These are human beings we're talking about, right? That have family, that have children. A lot of them, they have citizen children, right? Or they may be an immigrant married to an American citizen. It's not so clean. But what I hear, at least in as the campaign goes, this idea that, well, we're just going to deport. We're going to have mass deportations and get rid of these immigrants that are already here. And, I just think to myself, there's a lack of humanity in that policy. And I don't understand. That's where it's like, whereas there was a time, Brett mentioned Reagan, right? Reagan granted amnesty, right? I know there's a lot of things that go, like there's a whole political backstory to that, and I won't go into it, but at least there was a humanity in that policy versus mass deportations without. Now, like Dion said about other stuff, I don't think it's going to happen. You think the federal government's getting their act together enough to just deport millions of people? I don't think it's happening. But the idea that people think that's the solution and that at least one party is campaigning on it as this is the solution to this problem is where I'm like, I can't wrap my head around that.
Well, Thea, I'm glad you brought up the amnesty thing, because that was something else that I kind of wanted to talk about here when we talk about immigration. You had amnesty under Reagan. More recently, we had the Dreamers Act under Obama. And so one, you are absolutely right that these are human beings, right? They're not commodities. They're not chattel. Right? They're not things. They are human beings. And I would say probably the vast majority of them are coming here for very valid reasons and they want to come here. They want to become Americans. They want to, assimilate into our country, bring part of their culture, assimilate into our culture. And they want to become citizens. I believe that's the vast majority, but and so I'm not against immigration, but the thing that the Amnesty and the Dreamers Act brings to mind is that if you set a precedent as a lawmaking entity, right, which the government is, of we're going to set this law, and then if you break the law, just wait long enough, and then you'll be forgiven for breaking the law, and then everything's fine. I think what it does is there will be people who will say, I'll take my chances and I'll hope on something like amnesty, hope on something like Dreamers, and hope that I'll be okay. I think it enables people more easily to do things illegally.
I'm not even pushing back on you. I noticed I didn't advocate that amnesty is the solution to our current situation. However, I do think they're two extremes, right? You have amnesty and you have let's just deport all these people and get them out of our country, regardless of the impact that could have on our economy. First of all, like as an employment lawyer, I can tell you a lot of our economy is still based on the work and labor of many of these immigrants that we talk about, whether they're documented or undocumented. There is a huge undocumented workforce in this country. And it's unfortunate because we are benefiting from their labor. And, it doesn't necessarily help the American worker because it drives wages down, but it does benefit some of these companies, but we need to reconcile with that. Right. So I'm not advocating for amnesty, but there's got to be something in between amnesty and deportation. And I don't really I hear the Democrats trying to talk about pathways to citizenships, trying to talk about giving more resources to ICE and to, the immigration courts so that they can process legal immigration, the asylum applications and whatnot. But I don't hear from either side a real me saying, okay, under these policies in 5 years, we'll have made real progress on this problem. And that's something that I think is unfortunate.
Hey, Brett, can I ask, how would we stop the bleeding? To your example, your statement you were saying earlier about we got to fix ourselves. How would you stop the bleeding so that we can fix our policies before we then start letting people back in, I guess is where you were going.
Sure. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I know all of the information that I need to really answer that question fully.
Yes,
right?
Brett, how do you cure cancer?
But it's no, and I mean, I can give perspective on it for sure, but I mean, to think that I have all of the information to give a realistic answer, it's not possible, right? I don't think one person can really know all of that. But just from like a logical standpoint of how I would look to do that is that first, yeah, you do need to put some limitations on immigration, right? It doesn't mean that we stop it. It doesn't mean it's a forever solution, but there needs to be a limitation just for us to allow to have resources to be able to handle what we have first, right? We just got done talking about policy and how funding cycles take years to get things through, right? So you can't, and this is one of the things like Thea, when you were talking about this before, it's like when people look at the issue, like with FEMA, they're like, well, we just sent this money overseas and we could have been using that here. Okay, the government wallet doesn't operate like your personal budget, right? You can't just say, oh, I'm short on gas money, I'll just pull from my groceries and suddenly fund it. Like, it doesn't work that quickly, right? But that's how people's perspective is.
But there are procedures for emergency reallocation. It's not like you can't
Absolutely
do it.
But it also requires Congress to be.
I agree, Ian. Like,
and
sorry, I missed that. What was that?
I said it requires Congress to be in session, and it's an election year, so that's
so
to be us,
So, but again, like there's all these things, there's all these factors, like every problem, it's never black and white. It's always a multifaceted issue, right? But when you're looking at how to do this, yeah, we have to, like I said, limit immigration for a time frame. And then we look at the systems that we have in place. I mean, gosh, you look at Denver, for example, over the last 2 years, they've had 40,000 immigrants plus come into that area. And it does cause a level of chaos. And, like I said, with Springfield just right here, we've got, 10,000 plus immigrants that are coming into the area of 60,000 people. That's an issue. And when you have, a governor of a city or the mayor of the city that says, yes, let's do this. And if the people aren't in agreement or aren't made aware of it or to know what's there, you have central planning issues that come in and it creates unintended consequences. And we're seeing a lot of that. So to handle it, there's so many, I don't know, I feel very like woefully inadequate in trying to answer this question because I don't know if I can come up with an answer. But to basically be able to say, like, if we try to continue like what we've been doing, that's not going to work, right? There has to be a change for a time so that we can get better at it. An example that comes to mind is, Truett Cathy with Chick-fil-A, right? There was, if you understand their story, there was a time frame where them and Boston Market were in the means to grow the biggest chicken business. And Boston Market was like, let's go bigger, 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 bigger. And so Truett Cathy was in his meeting with his executives and they were saying, we need to get bigger. We need to get bigger. And he eventually just slams his fist on the table and he says, no, we need to get better and our customers will demand that we get bigger. And that's where we have to be. It's kind of, we have to slow down in order to do things so that we can speed up eventually. And like I said, I don't know exactly how that works, but that's the mindset.
So, Brett, I would throw out there that our immigration policies are already very restrictive. It is like that goes back to one of the points that several of us have made since the beginning of this conversation is that it is difficult to legally immigrate to the United States. And yet what we have is just a huge influx. And by the way, Will, when you asked, is that true? I was looking at, this is coming from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection website. They have a graph and I would share it, but basically from 2020, the graph just shoots up, and this is encounters, the number of encounters at the Southwest land border, which includes people who are crossing for asylum and also people who are just crossing and they just apprehend and send them back over the border.
And that was my point, is that's the chart I've seen that shows that there are more encounters, potentially because there are more resources at the border to encounter with the immigrants. That is the graph that I see the most, is a huge increase in encounters. Now, I'm perfectly happy giving you the argument of, I mean, surely it's not all of that increase is due to more Border Patrol agents. Surely it's also because there are more people coming in. I'm also, 100% willing to give you, from 2016 to 2020, people didn't want to come here and test their luck against that system and get put in cages and separated from their kids. I got all that too.
I mean,
but it's, go ahead, Thea.
Well, I mean, I think you bring a good point up, right? At some point, do we become, in the interest of deterring immigration, do we become the thing that we say we hate, or the thing that we're not? When you're putting kids in cages, when you're putting systems in place to deter people from coming that are cruel, then maybe we've accomplished slowing down the number of people that are coming in. But then who did we become? And that's where I that was what enraged me about some of those policies and some of those acts. Like, okay, we want to solve this problem, but what did we become in the process? And if that's the America that we want, then I'm like, that doesn't feel American to me, but yet it is, right? There's always a discomfort of what America actually is versus what we purport to stand for. And that is, to me, a shame on our house, right? Or shame on our country. And when we talk about this issue, though, like, that's why we have to talk about, like, how do we actually solve for this? So, yes, you create a better legal system to bring people in, but you still got to address all the people on the ground. So you don't want to give everybody amnesty, but we don't want to just just deport them. So then what do we do? But our conversation is that's not where the conversation is. And that's what frustrates me as a Democrat, even with my own party, that, I'm hearing more policy, ideas and proposals being thrown out there. But a lot of times they're border security. They're not about what do we do with all the folks that are already here? What do we do if there's always going to be a need for people to want to immigrate? I don't hear the discussion around that. And that's where I feel like we're lost as a country, in how we even approach the issue.
So I just want to make sure that we're all aware of the time. We're getting close to the end here. So we should probably go around and do closing arguments. So Brett, you've been very quiet this whole session. Why don't you let us know what's on your thoughts for closing on this topic?
Sure. I mean, honestly, that's a bit of my nature. I'm a bit of a watcher. I like to just observe and take things in. I don't like to try to make snap judgments and stuff. I like to hear everything. So yeah, I tend to sit back and listen because honestly, I believe it leads to a greater understanding of each other. But I guess kind of my closing thoughts on it are it's a lot of what I already expressed, in the fact that there needs to be a change, right? Exactly what that change is, I don't know, right? If we have, Dion, like you said, we already have very restrictive immigration laws. Okay, well, then the issue is not there. The issue maybe resources need to go to maybe changing those to make it easier to get through the process so people wouldn't feel the need to go outside of the legal route. Or there needs to be more resources put to stopping the illegal immigration and guiding people to the right areas. And Thea, I agree with you that humanity is a key point. We have to remember that we are humans, right? And that we have to love each other. That's one of the points that we've made during the role of government. And I think in several conversations is that you have to put life first, right? That has to be the paramount of where you stand from, is that you value life. But there's so many factors that come into that, because you have to take into account the lives of the people that are trying to come in this country, but also the lives of the people that are already here. And there's a balance that has to be struck with that. If we'd had more time, Thea, just like Willa kind of asked, like, what my solution was to it, I would have loved to have heard yours as well, because you're talking about, okay, what do we do with the people that are here, but you haven't really heard solutions. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that, because obviously it's something you've thought about. So I imagine there's something there. But I mean, ultimately what it comes down to, at least from my standpoint, this is where at least I disagree with the party platform, the Republican Party platform, in terms of the mass deportation. I don't think that's the right answer, because it's kind of an inhumane approach. Do I think there may need to be some level of that? Maybe, but it's very much a case-by-case basis. You can't just mass deport people just because they happen to be here. I think that's the wrong answer. But ultimately what it comes down to is, there needs to be some level of reform. I don't think we're going to come to a solution through the four of us, but maybe we can at least give
Not
people something to think about.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough, Dion.
All right, Will.
This is a complex, challenging situation. And, we didn't even get to talk about foreign aid to the countries where these immigrants are coming from. We'd mentioned the fact that a lot of them are coming here for economic reasons and not necessarily, physical harm type reasons. And I believe that the way that this issue is being talked about from the right has actually set us back decades. That, there had been attempts at immigration reform under George W. Bush. There was a bipartisan proposal even, within the last year, but it's so nuanced, it's so complex that, when we're talking about, the Haitians in Ohio are eating cats and dogs, and now a certain percentage of the American population that's what they think of. I just think in terms of actually trying to get at this problem, I think we've been set back decades. I think that at least Trump, if not a decent number of Republicans, want to be able to run on this problem, that if it went away, that's a big platform that they lose. And I think it's just too complex. It's too challenging to boil it down to sound bites. Like we talked about earlier, there are nuggets of truth in all of this. And when that's all the time that people have is to listen to the 7-second soundbite on the evening news, then that's what they've got. And it's not going to be fixed in a soundbite.
Yeah. Thea?
Yeah, I think Brett actually hit the nail on the head when he said that we have to keep the humanity and the thought of life and put that first. It's ironic because I'm sure we'll get to an abortion conversation later, and I'll have my wording will be a little different on that, or I'll frame it differently. But I feel like the conversation, like you said, Will, is not about all people involved. And we like to have these conversations where us as American citizens, we see ourselves here and then it's them. But as someone whose family is made up of both us and them, if nothing else, I want to reframe the way that we speak about these issues, right? That a lot of the people we're talking about live in America, contribute to our society. They're not criminals. They're not rapists. They're not murderers. They're just ordinary people trying to live their lives, and they care about their families. They care about the communities that they're a part of. And maybe they speak a different language. Maybe they make different food, but that doesn't mean that they don't believe in what we do as Americans, and that they shouldn't be given the opportunity to contribute to our country. And they have a lot to offer, right? I think that I've offered a lot in my service to this nation and my continued service in the work that I do and being a part of my community. And at the end of the day, I'm a child of an immigrant, right? And I just wish that we could break this conversation down, even with knowing all the nuance. And I'm not naive. I know that there's issues that need to be addressed with border security. I understand the drug cartels and different bad actors that take advantage of the holes in our immigration system. I'm not naive to that, but I just think that we need to broaden the conversation and bring the humanity back into it. And I think if we're talking about it in more of a way where we're putting people first and then having a real conversation in that aspect, we could get to solutions where we could talk about jobs and we could talk about, some of these immigrants are willing to go live in some of the places where the jobs are, right? Where those populations need workers. And then there's other populations where we can look at, if we're allowing folks to be here legally, then they're not driving down wages because they can work on the books, so that American workers aren't being negatively impacted in the same way. There's so many things we can have a more robust conversation about this issue. And my only plug is to start talking about it in the reality from a human perspective and not from this us versus them, they're coming to kill us kind of fear mongering. And so I guess that's it. I wish we could get away from the fear of immigration and start talking about it in more of a realistic, holistic way.
Okay. I think I'm going to be a little bit of a wet blanket here, but I'm okay with doing that because the next thing we're going to do is talk about what's been making us happy. So again, I want to reiterate, I believe that we should have legal immigration. We should open up our country to those people who want to come here and want to assimilate into the United States of America, be part of our melting pot. I think immigration and immigrants a lot of times bring positive things to our country and help us all to flourish. That said, I happened to pull up the usdebtclock.org website while we were talking, and we are currently at $35.7 trillion in debt. That is another thing that we're going to have to talk about at some point, is the economy, the national debt, deficit spending, all that kind of stuff. But the reality is that we live in a resource constrained environment. We don't necessarily feel that way because here in America, the vast majority of us are in like the top 1% of like the global richest people, right? Like any of us that live middle class here in America would be in the top 1% globally for how we live. So it doesn't feel like we're resource constrained, but we are. And so when you're resource constrained, you have to put priorities on things. And I think what a lot of people on the right would say, and I take it from a slightly different perspective, just that I think that government is too large to begin with. But I think a lot of people on the right would say, we should be taking care of America, like we should prioritize America and Americans, and then prioritize our allies, and then prioritize everybody else, right? Because if resources weren't constrained and we could just take care of everybody, we would. We're all human. We would want to take care of everybody. But if you've only got 2 loaves of bread and 5 mouths to feed, you got to figure out who needs the bread the most and what you're going to take care of, right? We all have families. I think all of us probably at the end of the day, we would go, you know what? I feel for you, my friend, but my family comes first. I'm not going to put my family in the poorhouse to take care of my friend, right? And then I'm not going to put my family and my friend in the poorhouse to take care of the stranger. I think most of us would do that because we don't have unlimited funding. All right. That being said, right, wet blanket, let's get on to what's been making us happy this week. And I guess since I'm talking, I'll just go ahead and get into it. So for me this week, again, it happens to be something fairly recent. It's something I've been doing all weekend, but I've been doing a lot of woodworking. It's something I picked up during COVID when we were all sitting at home waiting to return to the Pentagon. And I had a lot of telecons that I was just sitting and listening in on, but I could sit there and I could sand or I could, do whatever that didn't involve power tools. I could work on stuff. So I've been building this shelving unit to go behind our bed to give us a lot more storage space for things. And it's finally coming together. I'm putting like a little power socket on each side for me and my wife so that we could plug our phones and stuff in. We've got little reading lights above each side of the bed so that we can each have our own light. There's like, we have a couple of drawers and things that we might want to access in the middle of the night. So I put in some motion sensor LEDs on those. So yeah, it's taken me a couple of weeks to get to this point, but it's been a lot of fun building this, and it's really starting to come together. And woodworking is just one of those things that's like 99% Zen and 1% want to throw something, but yeah, mostly it's fun.
When you said that you got into woodworking because of COVID, I thought like I went to whittling. Like that you sat there in your telecons just whittling wood, and then you said, the headboard type thing. Like, okay, you probably didn't whittle that out of
I could totally see Dion making his own chess set.
Yeah, All right, so I live in Tampa. We just got hit with Milton this week. We got hit with Helene 10 days before that. and there's another one out in the Atlantic forming right now. But this week, maybe not happy, but thankful. We were not hit as bad as some of our neighbors. We were hit. We've got some roof leakage and lost some fence and a tree and stuff like that. But we made it through okay. And then the next morning, I've never seen so many neighbors talking to each other as, the morning after the hurricane went through. And, for better or for worse, I'm learning the names of my neighbors. We've only lived here 2 months, but learning the names of some of my neighbors that I didn't know before. And just seeing everyone kind of coming together, making sure that everyone's okay and offering help and that sort of thing. It was nice to see. And then also we got out of town and went to Halloween Horror Nights for last night, just to kind of take our minds off of things.
I feel bad for sharing mine based on what's going on with the weather in Florida, but mine was so I separated from active duty in 2015, and then I left the reserves in 2021, and I was never a runner. I wasn't in the military, but the military forced me to keep in cardiac shape because we had to pass those PT tests. So in recent years, I had kind of gotten away from working out and doing longer workouts. And today I did a 5-mile workout, and I haven't done that since I was on active duty. And it was a really nice day. I live by the beach. So I live in Redondo Beach. Dion used to live here years ago. So I ran from a place called Hermosa Beach. I started in Manhattan Beach, and I ran down to Redondo Beach. They have piers, and I ran from one pier to next and back. And I made it. It may have taken me an hour. And I was not people, they were young, beautiful people, doing their runs. And I'm and I'm sweating and but I made it. And I felt good. And I'm going to continue to try to, kind of get back into, I don't think I'm ever going to be in second lieutenant shape, but if I could get back to some semblance of that, I'll feel good about myself. So it was an accomplishment today.
Did you enjoy it while you were doing it, or only after it was over? I
enjoyed it in the beginning. And then as I got more and more tired, I was like, why am I doing this to myself? And then it was over. I was like, okay, then I felt good, and I feel good now. So, yeah.
It's all good, Thea. No discipline is pleasant at the time, right? But it produces good fruit. So, got to roll with that. For me, we're all parents here, so I don't know if this is good or bad, but a lot of my happiness comes from my kids. Just seeing them kind of grow up through life and experience things. And so I had the opportunity where I didn't get to go, but I got to see my wife take my daughter to her first camping trip. Right. So she's, out in the woods, exploring stuff, just, getting to learn life skills, which I thought was really cool. So I got to see that through pictures, but it just made me happy when I see the pictures of my daughter smiling, having a good time learning those things. And while I was getting those, I got to hang out with my other kids, but my son had a soccer game, and he was playing rec league, but had a great season. He made just leaps and bounds improvements in his skills, but more importantly, his attitude, right? His sportsmanship has really grown this year. And just as a dad, that makes me really proud to see that he's becoming not just growing up, but becoming a good person through it. So that's the stuff that's made me happy this week.
That's awesome.
Awesome. All right.
Well, oh yeah. I know I did the intro. I'll let Dion do the conclusion then.
Oh no, sorry. I guess it's my habit, but we haven't really discussed what we're going to talk about next week. So I guess that's one thing that we'll be talking about during the week, figuring out what we're going to talk about. Will has suggested climate change might be apropos.
Every time we get hit with another hurricane, I would like to talk about climate change, but at the same time, I don't know, might hit a little close to home.
Don't want to jinx yourself too much with it, Will.
Since we are coming up on an election in just a few short weeks, maybe, so we've talked about immigration. One of the other topics that seems to be on everybody's mind is the economy. So maybe we can talk about that next week before the election, but we'll see. So everybody stay tuned. And as Thea said at the beginning of this episode, if you're liking what you see and hear, like and subscribe, and hopefully you'll keep coming back for more. All right, we'll talk to you guys next week.